Punch soaked my hair before I could move. The gym lights blurred as red liquid ran down my face and stained the front of my blazer, and my first thought was that everything in that room was suddenly loud and stupid. People saw me and stopped being people for a second, just an audience hunched over their phones. Ms. Lawson laughed like it was a show and shouted, "Well, look who decided to come back, the dropout returns." Her voice landed on me like a slap. Mr. Walker was already doing his thing, shaking his head like he was narrating a failure. Wasted potential, shame on him, shame on the school. It was theater, and I was the prop they'd chosen for the night. Hands grabbed my arm before I could step back and someone yanked my phone away from my pocket. I saw the lock screen, that tiny headline that said CEO, and a dozen faces lit up with something that wasn't curiosity, more like glee. They scoffed. Someone snorted when they saw my cracked screen and my name, my company on display. "CEO, huh?" a parent called out like that made it worse. I tried to explain. My mouth worked and no sound came out, like I'd misplaced the words inside myself. Then Ms. Grant had scissors in her hand, somehow, like it was passed to her on cue. Before I could pull away, she cut a chunk from the side of my head. It tore like a paper pull. The sound of the scissors felt loud enough to bruise. Pain shot up my scalp and I tasted blood in my mouth. Laughter changed into a jeer. Someone cheered, real cheers, the kind you get at the end of a cruel joke. Ms. Lawson tipped her cup and poured punch over me, cool liquid soaking into my shirt and dripping down my collar. Then she slapped me hard enough to make stars explode behind my eyes. I saw the principal's face twist into something practiced and cold. The principal grabbed my wrist and twisted it, whispering in my ear about trespassing and calling the police. "You don't have the right to be here," he hissed. "You're disrupting our ceremony." I tried to tell him I came for my sister, that this was my kid's night, but the words came out thin and useless. Parents pulled out phones and they were lawyers, witnesses, jury, all at once, clicking record like they were saving a moment to savor later. I stood there soaked, bleeding at the scalp where they'd yanked my hair, humiliated in front of an auditorium full of parents who filmed everything. My blazer clung to me and I could feel the wet weight of 100 judgments. My heart was a drum banging against my ribs. I kept thinking about my team, Marcus, the 19 people who checked their phones for my name, and how small this moment felt against the work we'd done. I thought about the Delaware paperwork, the code, the midnight calls. None of it changed what was happening now, a room stacked with people who wanted me smaller. I wanted to leave, to vanish into the parking lot and scrub the smell of punch out of my hair. Then Emily pushed through the crowd with her plaque clutched like a weapon and pulled me free. She didn't scream or cry, she walked straight to us and planted herself between me and the teachers like someone far older than her 13 years. Her eyes were burning. She wasn't the kid who looked up to teachers anymore, she was my sister and she was done tolerating their performance. "Stop," she said, plain and flat, but the words split the noise. "You don't get to do this to him." She took my hand, rough fingers like a lifeline, and her voice shook only a little. She didn't look like she needed me to tell her what to do. She told the teachers to listen. She told them to look at the hospital bracelet on my wrist. No, I hadn't shown her yet, but she knew what to say. I asked her to step outside so I wouldn't ruin her night. I told her I didn't want cameras to catch us arguing. She didn't care about the cameras. We left the gym together, walking past people who kept filming and whispering like I was an animal that had escaped its pen. In the car, punch still dripped down my neck and the cracked phone lay in my lap like evidence. I told her everything then, quick and blunt as a confession made because I had to. 2 app launches. Delaware Corp team of 19, valued at $8.5 million, I said, because saying the numbers out loud felt like filling an empty space with something solid. She listened, silent and steady, and asked for the names she needed to know. She said nothing when I told her I'd kept it secret to protect our family. She just stared out the window like someone already planning her next move. She made me go to urgent care before anything else. "Document it," she said, simple and smart, and I did. The triage nurse took a picture of my scalp and wrote down notes about the bruises. The doctor asked calm questions and typed them into a computer like someone making a record for history. I called the non-emergency police line with my cracked screen and a voice that sounded smaller than me. They took a report and promised a detective would follow up. By dawn, Marcus was on my phone, voice tight and efficient, making plans I didn't have the energy to imagine. Paula, our attorney, set a meeting and told me to save everything, paper and pixels, and for the first time since the slap, I felt like maybe this was not just humiliation, it could be evidence. We fled to her car with punch still dripping from my hair and my cracked phone heavy in my lap, and the whole ride felt like someone had shoved my life into a small, moving box. I started talking because silence would have let that room and those faces win. 2 launches, I said, breath coming fast, counting off the facts like coins. Delaware Corp, valued at $8.5 million, 19 people on the payroll. Saying the numbers out loud made them real and scared me at the same time. "You kept all that?" Emily asked, eyes on the road and jaw set like it meant business. "Yeah," I said, because the truth was simple and ugly. I'd hidden it to keep mom and dad from worrying and to keep the kids at school from seeing it as ammunition. She didn't argue about our reasons. She just reached over and squeezed my hand like it was something fragile and worth holding. "We're going to do this right," she said, voice steady like someone reading a plan off a list. "Urgent care first, document everything." I didn't want to look like a man who needed instructions, but the punch was still warm on my neck and the hair where they'd ripped at my scalp left a raw place that hurt every time I moved. She parked and we went in together, walking into the fluorescent light with the smell of antiseptic that makes real life feel official. The nurse took photos straight away, unbothered, like this was another Tuesday. She clicked the camera against my scalp and wrote down the bruise on my cheek, and each photo felt like a little armor plate being added to a case I suddenly needed to make. The doctor asked normal questions in a calm voice. Where did it hurt? When did it happen? Who did this? Details that somehow made the scene in the gym less of a nightmare and more of a legal event. I told the truth. I told him names when he asked, and he typed them into a chart with professional patience. The paper in his hand that gave me a list of diagnoses felt smaller than it should have, but still it was something official to carry out the door. Emily sat in the waiting room like a statue, her plaque on her lap, and I thought about how strange it was that a proud moment for her had turned into my worst hour. She asked about witnesses, and when I told her some parents had recorded video, she didn't flinch. "Get everything," she said again, like a drill sergeant and a sister at once. I called the non-emergency police line from my shattered screen because it was the right next step even if my hands still shook. The dispatcher asked me to describe the event and said she would log it as an assault report. "A detective will follow up," she promised in a voice trained to make people believe paperwork is action. I didn't feel relief. I felt like I'd set a thing in motion and now I had to wait and hope it landed on ears that cared. When I hung up, Marcus called. His voice was immediate and sharp, and I could hear him unspooling plans before I even finished speaking. "Where are you? Are you okay? Save everything. Pictures, videos, names, don't post anything public," he said, and his voice carried a kind of authority that made me feel steadier than I expected. Marcus told me he'd reached out to Paula Thompson, an education law attorney he knew, and had already booked an emergency consult for the morning. "Paula's handled messy school stuff before," he said. "She'll tell you what to do, preserve everything, get witness names." Hearing their names, Marcus and Paula, felt like calling in reinforcements after a bad storm. I told him about the nurse photos, the police report, and the video one parent had sent. He told me to forward everything to him and to lock my phone down. "We'll handle PR later," he said. "Right now, evidence and witness statements, we control the narrative by controlling the facts." Paula called that night and spoke in plain terms that made the mess feel manageable. "Preserve all footage, don't delete messages, get affidavits from anyone who filmed or saw it, don't speak to the district without me." She listed steps like a surgeon explaining a procedure, and I wrote them down on a napkin in the car because my hands needed something to do. She explained emergency preservation orders and FOIA requests and how the union might push back. Her voice made me feel less like a man being torn down and more like someone with a strategy. She said she'd be at her office at 7:30 and to bring everything I had. "We'll start there," Paula said. "We can do damage control and get some accountability." The whirlwind had just begun, and sitting in that car with Emily next to me, I felt the strange mix of dread and purpose. My head still throbbed and my suit was ruined, but the facts we'd begun collecting felt like tools we could use. I kept thinking about my team and Marcus, and how fragile those 19 livelihoods could be if this blew sideways. I also thought about the kids who needed scholarships and chances, about the way teachers can morph into judges and juries when fear speaks louder than evidence. We were about to make a record, and for the first time that night, I felt like the record might actually mean something. Paula had us file a formal complaint with Superintendent Helena Ruiz that afternoon, and I remember how my hands felt like they belonged to someone else when I signed the pages. Helena listened like she read everything twice before you finished speaking, slow and careful, and she asked for the medical photos right away. When she saw the pictures of the scalp laceration and the bruising, she didn't blink. "We'll put them on leave while we investigate," she said, and the words landed like a small mercy. Hearing that 3 staff members would be moved to paid administrative leave felt like someone unbolting a door I hadn't known was closed. I hadn't expected that quick a response, and for a second I let myself think maybe things could be handled without theater. Paula drafted letters that spelled out each act in blunt detail. Ms. Lawson pouring the drink and slapping me, Ms. Grant cutting my hair with scissors, and Mr. Walker's public humiliation in front of parents. She wrote the letters like she was carving facts into hard wood, exact and unsentimental. "We have to be precise," she told me, tapping the paper. "No rhetorical flourishes, just what happened, who did it, and the witnesses." I read the drafts and felt my jaw tighten when my own name appeared in black type surrounded by dates and actions. It was strange to see those moments reduced to sentences, but Paula was right. This was not about how I felt in the moment, it was about building a record. We filed FOIA requests for the gym's security camera footage and began collecting parent statements like someone gathering stones to build a wall. People who had been at the ceremony started sending messages that exploded my phone. Some parents wrote long, angry paragraphs about what they'd seen. Others sent quick confirmation texts and short videos from their phones. A nurse who'd been seated near the front sent a written note about the visible injuries she'd seen on my scalp and the bruise she'd photographed on her own phone. Multiple parents offered sworn accounts, and one father sent a clip that showed the scissors and the punch in a raw, unedited 30 seconds. I felt each message like a hand pulling me up out of quicksand. The district receptionist handed me forms for requesting the camera footage, and I stared at them like a man looking at diagrams for a machine he'd never built. The language on the forms was official and confusing, codes and boxes I didn't want to misfill. Paula's assistant sat with us and walked me through the process, explaining which boxes to check and what kind of description they'd expect for incident location and time frame. She warned me in a low voice that footage might be labeled unavailable or overwritten, and that in many districts tapes only keep days of footage before being recorded over. Her caution felt like a splinter under my fingernail. It made the truth sound fragile and easily erased. We filed the FOIA anyway and got a receipt proving we'd tried. The receipt was small and bureaucratic, but it meant the clock had started on paperwork and legal paths that could force the footage into view. Paula explained preservation orders that could compel the school to keep the tape from being destroyed, and she started drafting one immediately. "If we don't act, evidence disappears," she said, simple and firm. I watched her work and felt like I was in someone else's story, someone with a legal map in their pocket. When she told me they'd also request teacher emails and staff calendars, I suddenly understood how wide the net could be. Parents kept sending video and statements while we worked. Some wanted to remain anonymous and asked to sign affidavits. Others wanted their names on the record because they were angry and wanted to be part of making it right. Marcus coordinated with me to catalog everything, timestamps, names, who'd posted what online, who agreed to sign a sworn statement if needed. He sent me a list of questions to ask witnesses to make their statements usable in a legal process. "Don't ask them to editorialize," he wrote, "just facts, what you saw, when, and who was involved." It felt like turning human outrage into careful, usable truth. The backlash started fast, too, parents calling the school, teachers, union reps asking questions, a few folks defending the staff with angry emails saying we were making a mountain out of a punch. Paula expected it and told me how to respond. No public comments, redirects to legal counsel, and keep the record tight. The district's steps and Paula's letters had bought us breathing room, and Helena Ruiz followed through on leaving the staff on paid leave while the district's investigator compiled statements. Sitting in a small conference room with a stack of printed emails and photographed evidence, I realized that what had started as humiliation in front of a gym full of people had become a formal, messy process with rules and deadlines. It was exhausting, but it was also a kind of justice taking shape, slow, procedural, and stubbornly real. The parents' videos arrived within a day, and my phone felt like it was about to explode from the notifications, each clip a new cut into that night. One clip showed Ms. Grant grabbing my hair and cutting it with the scissors, the metal glinting as she moved like she was performing a trick. Another showed Ms. Lawson tipping her entire cup of punch over my head, the liquid pouring down my face while people laughed, and then you could hear the slap clear as a bell. I watched those clips with my hands clenched and the sound turned down because the noise made the memory worse, but I kept going through them because I needed every frame to be true. I forwarded everything to Paula and felt oddly naked sending those files, like I was handing someone the proof of how small they'd made me. Paula told me to make multiple backups plain and firm, and I obeyed without argument. "One copy is not a copy," she said, and I heard her years of doing this in the way she set her jaw. We started a digital folder with redundancies, hard drives, cloud storage, encrypted emails, and I labeled everything by time and source so no one could say later that we had lost something. That work felt steady and quiet compared to the chaos that had started in the gym, like building a dam when a river is already at flood stage. Marcus kept asking if I wanted him to handle any of it. I told him to keep doing what he did best, which was taking the panic out of business and turning it into steps we could follow. The detective the district assigned opened a file and spoke to me like someone trying to piece a map together. He said that multiple witnesses and video evidence made this look like more than a simple removal from the event. "This has elements of assault and battery," he said, measured and official, and hearing that phrase out loud made my stomach drop and my head clear at the same time. It meant what happened to me could be more than humiliation. It could be a legal wrong that had to be answered for. The detective asked questions about the timing, who touched me first, and who recorded what, and I gave him the names and forwarded the clips Paula wanted saved. He promised to secure anything the district hadn't yet turned over and to interview the parents who'd filmed. It felt like a slow machine starting up. Marcus handled internal communications at work while I stayed quiet in public, and he did it smoothly, telling the board what was happening in language that kept the company from tipping into panic. "We have an incident at a school involving our founder," he told them in an email that I didn't see at first but later read, and he framed it as a legal matter with a plan so investors wouldn't freak out. He coordinated with Paula about what we could and couldn't say, and he kept the team updated without giving away details that might harm the case. I was grateful for that steadiness. The last thing I wanted was to drag the company into a messy public fight or let fear ripple through the payroll. The union lawyer didn't waste time. He sent a defensive letter the day after we filed our complaint claiming I'd been trespassing and acting aggressively, and that the staff had only reacted to a perceived threat. I wasn't surprised. Paula had warned me that the union would try to turn the story and that the first move would be to shift blame onto me. Paula prepared our rebuttal the same day, calm and thorough, attaching the urgent care records, medical photos, and parent statements we'd already collected. "Facts beat spin," she told me, and the papers she prepared read like a ledger of what had actually happened, not opinion. We included sworn statements from parents who'd seen the hair cutting, the punch, and the slap, plus the nurse's note and the time-stamped clips. I sat with those documents spread on my kitchen table like the pieces of a puzzle, and for the first time since the gym I felt like I could start to build something back. It wasn't about revenge. It was about forcing a record into the world that could not be erased by a rehearsed teachers' union statement or a defensive principle. Paula told me we'd demand preservation orders for the footage and push for disciplinary measures alongside any criminal inquiry. Marcus lined up a PR play that kept me out of the spotlight while still protecting the company's interests. I slept in fits that night, but the next morning I woke with that rare hard focus that pain sometimes brings, the kind that makes you ready to do the slow, boring work of proving what's true. I started therapy 2 days later because I couldn't stop seeing the scissors and feeling the punch like it was still happening inside my chest. The first session hit hard, no small talk, just a chair and a woman who asked me to tell it again. She had me walk through the gimelites, the hands, the cup tipping, the slap, and the sensation of my hair being cut. Saying it aloud felt like peeling a scab. It hurt, but it also made the edges less sharp. She taught me a breathing trick for when panic shows up without warning and asked me to name the emotions instead of letting them run me. "Name it," she said. "Humiliation, anger, fear." Saying those words out loud made them less like ghosts and more like things I could manage. We rehearsed the sequence until it felt like a tool I could hold instead of a wound. She asked for exact details, the timing, where people stood, who laughed, and what was said. I had to repeat some parts until my voice stopped shaking. She pushed on the parts that made me want to look away, not to punish me but to give me control over the story. She also gave me breathing exercises for sudden panic, slow inhales through the nose, count to 4, slow exhale through the mouth, and told me to practice them in the car, before meetings, and before sleep. I did because I wanted to stop waking up with the taste of punch in my mouth. The therapy wasn't a cure, it was a set of tools I could use while other people used legal tools. Paula was doing the legal slow burn and she counseled patience like a weapon. "Silence now equals leverage later," she told me in her office, hands folded, as if she was arranging chess pieces in her head. She warned that anything I said publicly could be twisted and that the union and the district would try to control the narrative. She prepared for mediation and a possible trial, mapping out evidence paths and witness statements. She asked me to fill every gap in the record and to resist the urge to answer attacks. I filled out intake forms for her into the early morning hours, mostly because the adrenaline kept me awake and because writing it down made the chaos feel organized. Each form asked the same thing in different ways. What happened, when, who did what you said, what you felt. I wrote it all more than once because legal paperwork likes repetition and detail. Emily took over the informal logistics side like she'd been training for this her whole life. She sat at our kitchen table with her plaque and a laptop and turned parents' scattered messages into a spreadsheet that looked like evidence. More than a dozen people had seen the whole thing, she said, and she cataloged their names, phone numbers, timestamps, and what each person had recorded. Marcus sent his own list to team members who could testify about my usual routines and my reputation. The spreadsheet grew like a plant fed water. Each new line made the case feel more solid and less like something someone could deny. Emily asked parents for sworn statements and took the awkward phone calls when people cried or wanted privacy. She handled all of it with a fierce calm that made me proud and ashamed at the same time. Between the urgent care records, the eyewitness videos, the messages, and the district's immediate action of placing staff on leave, the stack of evidence grew heavy enough to make people in authority sit up and listen. Paula used the medical photos and the nurse's note as anchors, simple items that proved physical harm. The videos supplied time stamps and angles, and the parent statements connected the dots about who started what and who cheered. The school's own acknowledgement that complaints were filed, and that staff were on leave became another official document we could point to when the union tried to claim misunderstanding. Every piece of paper I printed and every file I backed up felt like building a ladder out of a hole. Therapy kept me steady while we built the case, and it gave me language for the mornings when I wanted to stay in bed. The breathing exercises worked in the small moments when my phone buzzed with a new parent video or when a news alert mentioned the district. Paula kept pushing for formal preservation orders and the FOIA follow-ups, and she taught me how to watch for signs that someone might try to scrub footage or rewrite timelines. Marcus handled the company side and told the board what was happening without dragging our people into the fight. Emily kept the witness list growing and reminded me to sleep. It was all exhausting and necessary, a slow and ugly construction project to make sure what happened couldn't be erased. I was scared, but for the first time in days, I felt like we were moving from being victims to being architects of truth. Over the next 3 weeks, the district investigator and the police interviewed witnesses until their notebooks were full and my phone kept buzzing with names and times. I sat through calls and meetings, giving the same sequence again and again, and felt the story get cleaner with each telling. The history teacher who slapped me was the one who ended up facing misdemeanor battery charges because the slap was on video and so many people heard it. That clip made the charge feel inevitable, like a loud, undeniable fact in a room full of opinions. The other two teachers, Ms. Grant and Ms. Lawson, faced administrative consequences and mandatory training, things Paula pushed for hard as part of a broader fix. The union pushed back like a wall being rearranged, launching defensive letters and private calls meant to intimidate. They tried to make the slap sound like an isolated moment and push the narrative that I'd been the aggressor or that the staff had overreacted. Paula expected the push and prepared for it by building the paper trail that made spin useless. She demanded accountability that wasn't just performative, real disciplinary steps tied to clear policy changes. We weren't after a show apology. We wanted rules that would stop this from happening to someone else. So she pressed the district for new policies. No physical contact with visitors except in emergencies, mandatory de-escalation training for all staff, and clear, enforceable disciplinary steps when staff violated boundaries. Paula also filed a temporary restraining order to keep the 3 teachers away from me, and the judge granted it after seeing the medical records and the urgent care documentation. That order felt like a line drawn on a map that the other side could not cross. It stopped the immediate threat of being shoved into another gym confrontation while the legal process continued. Getting that court order gave me a small, necessary relief, like being handed a flashlight in a dark room. It didn't fix what happened, it just made sure there wouldn't be a repeat while the case moved forward. The union kept trying to paint me as the problem, saying I'd trespassed, that I'd been loud, that I'd provoked staff. They sent letters and demanded official responses. Paula answered each claim with facts, and we attached the urgent care photos, the nurse's note, the parents' sworn statements, and the videos. The parents' testimonies and the footage undermined the union's defense in a way papers or speeches couldn't. Each parent who signed a statement, and each clip that showed hands on my hair or a cup emptying over my head, narrowed the space left for excuses. The district investigator compiled those pieces and kept pressing forward with interviews and timestamps. As the district's case built up, it became harder for the union to block real change. Paula didn't accept vague promises. She wanted policy language and deadlines. She negotiated for mandatory de-escalation training that had to be completed by a set date and for the district to publish new rules about visitor interactions. She insisted on clear disciplinary steps so staff couldn't hide behind misunderstanding if they crossed the line again. The district eventually agreed to those changes, but not without a fight. The union wanted to limit the wording of apologies and to keep disciplinary consequences mild. I didn't want vengeance, but I also didn't want bland assurances that meant nothing. I wanted students and outsiders protected. The legal pressure and the documented evidence shifted the power in the room. The history teacher's misdemeanor charge meant criminal exposure, which made the union handle those discussions more carefully. Paula pushed for mediation as a path to institutional change instead of a long trial that would drag everyone through media and anger. We sought structural fixes, policy edits, staff training, and a scholarship fund to support students pursuing non-traditional paths, measures that would turn our settlement into something future-facing. Marcus kept the company steady and told the board every factual update so investors wouldn't panic while we negotiated. I spent a lot of days going over the same footage, watching frame by frame to stay ready for hearings and depositions. It was brutal and oddly necessary, like studying a wound to learn how to stitch it. The pressure from the union didn't stop the parents from speaking. If anything, it made those parents more determined to sign affidavits and testify. Their voices and their videos kept the truth in front of the investigators. I gave my testimony, Paula guided every step, and the district investigator kept adding weight to the case with each witness he interviewed. By the end of those weeks, the shape of accountability was no longer an option, it was happening. The criminal charge, the administrative penalties, the restraining order, and the district's willingness to change policy all added up. It wasn't a clean victory. The union still guarded its turf and some parents remained angry, but the record we built made it impossible to treat the incident as a simple misunderstanding. For the first time since the slap, I felt like the system could do what it was supposed to do: protect people, hold staff to standards, and make rules that prevent harm. I was exhausted, but also quietly relieved that our effort to document every detail had pushed the district toward real change. Mediation began tense and procedural, and I walked into the room feeling like someone about to sit through a sermon I didn't agree with. The union lawyer opened with a stack of rules and objections, and the district's rep read from a prepared statement that sounded like damage control. "We regret the disturbance," one official said, words careful and empty, and the way they avoided saying assault felt like a dodge. Paula leaned over and whispered, "We need acknowledgments that name the harm. Words matter." I nodded because she'd been right every step of the way, and because naming things was how you kept them from being erased. The union refused to allow apologies that used words like assault or wrongdoing, and their campaign felt like watching a shield being raised to protect an identity rather than fix a problem. "We cannot accept language that presumes guilt," the union lawyer said flatly, as if that statement could cancel a video showing a slap. Paula pushed back with facts, medical notes, and parents' sworn statements, but the union kept trying to narrow the language to blandness. "An apology that avoids the truth is useless," Paula said out loud enough for the room to hear, and she asked that apologies include recognition of harm, not just regret about a disruption. Midway through the proceedings, the math teacher, asked for a separate restorative meeting, and I agreed to it because Paula told me the path through mediation sometimes ran on parallel tracks. Sitting in her office with him across the table felt awkward and small in contrast to the gym blast of humiliation, but it also felt real in a way that cameras aren't. The math teacher's hands were empty and he looked older than his tenure hints at. When he spoke, his voice broke. "I'm burnt out," he said with a kind of honest shame I didn't expect. "I've been angry and I took it out on the wrong person. I didn't know him, I judged." He named what he'd done without excuses, and his apology wasn't rehearsed. "I'm sorry for humiliating you in front of your family," he said. "I was wrong." I listened and answered in a voice steadier than I felt. "Thank you," I said. "I accept your apology, but that doesn't erase what happened." I made it clear that forgiveness wasn't a currency being traded for silence. It was a gesture that didn't dismiss the damage or the need for real change. He acknowledged that and said he'd welcome the training and supervision Paula demanded. That moment felt like a stitch, small and practical. It didn't fix the rawness, but it made one human on the other side stop pretending and start taking responsibility. Back in the main mediation, the district agreed to moves I'd pushed for practical steps that mattered more than some neat press line. The principal would be reassigned to a non-student-facing role, which was the district's way of admitting that leadership failed to keep students and visitors safe. The other two teachers would have mandatory training and supervision, and their records would reflect that disciplinary steps had been taken. "We will institute de-escalation training and clear disciplinary protocols," Helena Ruiz said, and Paula made sure timelines were written into the agreement. I listened to the words and felt relief that policy would change, not just posture. We also hammered out the scholarship fund idea I'd insisted on during negotiations, something I wanted to lock into place so the settlement created opportunity rather than padding pockets. "This fund will support students pursuing non-traditional paths," Paula argued, and she wrote the language so the money would seed scholarships for kids who learn differently or want to start businesses instead of funneling into administrative accounts. I pushed for oversight by a committee that included students and community members so the fund couldn't be repurposed. Marcus negotiated the mechanics with me and the district. We agreed the money would be anonymous at first if the district insisted, but it would be used for students, not admin bonuses. The union fought every clause and tried to keep apologies vague, but the combination of parents' videos, sworn statements, and a judge's temporary order narrowed their options. Paula refused cosmetic concessions and kept steering the talks toward structural changes. When the district finally signed off on training, supervision, reassignment, and the scholarship fund, it felt like a real outcome. Hard, policy-level fixes that would hopefully prevent this from happening again. I left the mediation tired and still raw, but with a sense that our story had produced something that could outlast the anger and the headlines. It wasn't about revenge. It was about forcing responsibility into rules and money into opportunities for kids who deserved better. I sat in the back of the gym and tried not to move, feeling like the same man who'd been soaked with punch and had a chunk of his hair cut off months earlier. The lights were the same, the folding chairs the same, and for a second my chest tightened like the memory had a hand on it. The district leaders walked the stage with papers and practiced smiles, and when they began to read the new policies, my throat went dry. I listened because this was the part I'd fought for, the part that had to outlive the anger and the court filings. "We are instituting strict visitor policies," one official said into a microphone, and the sentence landed like proof that what we did mattered. The settlement had been about changing systems, not scoring points against people. We wrote in plain language what could no longer be acceptable. No physical contact with visitors except in bona fide emergencies, mandatory de-escalation training for every staff member, supervision and evaluation tied to clear disciplinary steps up to termination if someone crossed the line again. Paula had drafted the clauses and argued until the wording could not be watered down. "This is about safety and accountability," she told me when we signed. And seeing those phrases printed in the official agreement felt like building a fence around the next kid who might walk in and be treated like a spectacle. We also secured a scholarship fund, $60,000 to seed opportunities for students who wanted to build businesses or pursue creative careers outside the traditional academic track. I insisted the money go to the kids, not into some administrative pool. "Make it for the people who don't fit the classic mold," I said, because being written off as a dropout had been the worst part of that night. The district agreed, though they wanted anonymity at first, so the fund was set up quietly with oversight on how recipients were chosen. My sister sat on the selection committee for the first award, and she called me later with the name of the winner like she was proud, which put my chest in a different kind of ache. Sitting there that day and watching the district leaders announce policy reforms, I felt a mix of relief and a strange, raw memory. Parents who had supported me came over afterward and put their hands on my shoulder like neighbors delivering food after a loss. "You did the right thing," a woman said, and another dad who'd filmed the clip that nailed the slap nodded. They thanked me for not letting it slide, for forcing a change that would help their kids. I said thank you, because it was the right answer, and because it felt right to hear it from people who hadn't been inside the legal fights and the late-night evidence sorting. My company kept going. We grew from 19 to 35 employees and landed a big contract that meant we could put more people on payroll and start thinking about benefits like real health care. Marcus stayed steady, handling communications and investor concerns in a way that made panic seem like a foreign country. I stayed quiet publicly because Paula had been right. Silence preserved leverage and protected the business while the legal process finished. Behind the scenes, we managed reputational risk and kept our focus on products and people. The nights were long, but the work kept me from spending every minute with the memory. Therapy became routine. I kept going because the therapist taught me how to move the memory from a place that controlled me to a thing I could reference and not be controlled by. "Name the feeling, then let it pass," she said during sessions where I'd pace through the scene again and again. The breathing exercises helped when my phone buzzed with a new message from a parent or a reporter, and the hard work of naming humiliation and anger made it possible to sleep more than a few hours at a time. Healing for me was not forgetting. It was arranging the pieces so I could live with them without them swallowing me. Walking past that high school now, I still picture the slap and the scissors like a scar that shows up in the light. But I also see something else. Posted signs about visitor check-in, training certificates framed in the main office, and a scholarship plaque that lists the first recipient. Those things don't erase what happened to me, but they change the room in which it happened. They make it harder for someone else to be dragged into the same humiliation. People will argue about whether justice happened or whether the union was treated fairly. I know there are still parents who defended the teachers and there were angry emails. I don't have patience for people who want to make this about winners and losers. For me, the point was simple: protect people, hold staff to standard, and use what power I had to build something for kids who don't follow the usual path. The scholarship and the policy changes feel like a small, stubborn promise that if the system hurt someone, it might also be forced to repair what it broke. I left that gym with a headache and tired legs, but also with a sense that the work mattered beyond me.